Hey guys, Brad Gilmore here. Want to give a big shout out to our title sponsor, Walker Texas Lawyer. If you or a loved one have been injured in an accident, whether that be a car, truck, motorcycle accident, or some kind of other issue, hit up Walker Texas Lawyer at 713-552-1117 or walkertexaslawyer.com.
Oh, Brad, what have you done now?
Broadcasting live from Houston, Texas, and around the world. TV host, best-selling author, and radio personality Brad Gilmore brings you a collection of conversations with stars from movies.
Matthew McConaughey.
Brad Gilmore.
Mark Wahlberg.
Hey, how are you?
The legendary Mr. Christopher Lloyd. Christopher, how are we doing?
I'm doing good. Great introduction.
Television.
Jimmy Fallon joins us this morning. Jimmy, how you doing, my friend?
Good morning. Thank you so much, Brad, for having me. I appreciate this, bud.
Kelly Ripa.
Brad, thank you for having me.
Comedy.
Jay Leno joins us. Jay, how you doing?
Hey, Brad, what's going on?
Chris Tucker is in the building. Chris Tucker, good morning to you.
Hey, Brad. Good morning to you. How are you?
Gabriel Fluffy Iglesias.
Good morning.
Music.
Lola Monroe.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
The legendary frontman of AC/DC, Brian Johnson, joins us right now. Brian, how you doing?
Good morning, Brad. What looking to talk to me, funny lad.
Grammy Award winner Maya joins us.
How are you?
And more. This is The Collection. Now your host, The Boat.
Brad Gilmore!
And I'm so excited to be talking to the two guests joining me right now to talk about Watergate's Secrets and Betrayals, which is going to be available August the 8th. It's a documentary that dives into the Watergate scandal and the presidency of Richard Milhouse Nixon. And joining me is the director, George Bugatti, and of course, the narrator, Mr. John O'Hurley. How are you, gentlemen?
Wonderful.
Very well. Nice to be with you.
Nice to be with you as always. Now, Richard Nixon, to me, is a president who everybody obviously understands what his legacy has become in the last 5 decades. But he is still, I think, a mystery to a lot of people. And when you look at the beginning of the film, most people had no idea what Watergate even was. It's that long ago that some people have lost even touch with the significance of the moment. So, George, what made you want to start in on this project and dive into Watergate?
I read a book written by Geoff Shepard, came out in 2015. I read it in 2018. And at the very beginning of it, it has, and this is not verbatim, it's dedicated to the hundreds of men and women whose lives were ruined, whose lives are disgraced, who went to their graves in disgrace, never knowing the full extent of what the hell happened. And they were the recipient of a plot, of misconduct, of judicial and prosecutorial misconduct. And when I read that, it was arresting. It really hit me. That was the first thing I read. And then as I continued on, I found out that Geoff Shepard, the author, had discovered documents in our own National Archives and elsewhere that showed a very different narrative than we had been given. And it was nothing less than earth-shattering to me, because I remember a little bit about that. I was young, but I remember about it. And I'm a student of history, and in particular of American presidents. I find them fascinating. And so I've kept up with anytime a book or an essay or a film would come out about the Nixon administration or the era or that era or some of the people in the senior administration, I was always interested in it. And so this piqued my curiosity.
And John, when you hear the terms, when you're approached with this project and you hear Watergate, Nixon, what kind of comes to your mind before getting into all the weeds about it? Kind of where did this live with you, the Watergate scandal?
Well, it reminds me of the story of the Wizard of Oz. All of us have grown up with the nicely packaged story of the good witch and the bad witch and the victory of good versus evil. And then you come out with a Broadway musical called Wicked, which actually takes the opposite story, that the bad witch was really not that bad at all. And it tells you that history is a combination of time, action, and context. And I think that's exactly the brilliance of what this documentary does, is it goes into the context of what was available to us by digging up these wonderful archival reports from Archibald Cox and a few others, and it shows that really, as George said, judiciary misconduct. And the fact that what we thought, was kind of a cut and dry, well, Nixon was offering $1 million bribe, and it is not so. And if you go through what the documents actually say, he never got his day in court, and who knows how it would have ended up had he done.
Yeah, George, it is a fascinating thing to look at it from, as John just said, to use his metaphor, the Wicked Witches side of the story, and to understand the parts of history that to me fall on deaf ears. And I think that again, Watergate has become so synonymous with scandal, everything now is a gate. It's become the public consciousness. Whenever there's an issue, it's blank gate. When you're diving into this documentary, I think when you look at it in terms of laying out a film, different from a screenplay, right, where you know where the characters are starting and where the journey ends, I would find that a documentary would take you in different places, perhaps that you didn't expect on the onset. Did you find that was the case when you were doing this documentary, that a new piece of information would be uncovered and all of a sudden the edit takes a turn?
Well, because the documents laid out before me, not only in the book, but my collaborator, the author, Geoff Shepard, I pretty much knew what I was getting into. The big challenge was communicating to my audience, taking a document, a black and white, dry document, and having it come to life. And so what we did is we created scenes in a noir style. I studied Alfred Hitchcock and Orson Welles, and took a look at those shadows, because it's very clandestine. These meetings are secret. But the big takeaway for me was that the biggest takeaway for me, and I hope for the audience, is that, on November 7th, 1972, in a landslide victory, the largest ever before or after, 49 states, with the exception of Massachusetts and the District of Columbia, 2 years later, a year and a half later, the will of the people was overturned. That's pretty big. When that realization came upon me, I thought, this is just amazing. And that was the takeaway for me. That was the big takeaway for me.
And John, being able to narrate this project, what were some of the things that stuck out to you, learning of this information that you thought was very interesting that you had no idea about prior?
It had some really large words in it. No, again, it goes back to the fact that we have to look at history within the framework and the parenthetical of the context of it. It's not as cut and dry as we all think it is, and there are too many major parts of our history, and how contemporary this particular issue is on the level of, or on the question of executive privilege. There are so many questions about executive privilege that were drawn up at this time that were never really undertaken by the upper courts. And yet here we are dealing with them today again.
Yeah, that is interesting too. And George, it struck me when I'm thinking about the scandal and thinking about Nixon resigning from the presidency, as you put it, the will of the people was overturned a year and a half later. Do you think that this would have been the size scandal today if it occurred today? Would this be something that the president would even consider resigning for? Because we have seen so much in presidential history from Watergate, not just in recent years, but from 2000 and on, from things that happened in the 80s. Would you think that this is something that a president would resign from today? Would it be as big of a story?
I'm not smart enough to answer that question specifically, but what I can say is that the weaponization, today we have the term lawfare that's come up. You can, in my opinion, you can directly tie that back to the Nixon administration. I mean, it's been used. The threat of impeachment has been used. It was used with Bill Clinton. It's been used 3 times recently with former President Trump. Would it have been something that he would have resigned over? I don't think so, because I think today we have such a choice of alternative and various news sources. Back then we had 3. And today you can't. I mean, you had a couple of magazines and maybe PBS. Maybe I don't even know if they were around then. But today you have choices and there's information. It's been argued that there's too much information, but no, I don't think that he would have, because something would have ferreted its way out. The truth.
The truth, yes, in quotations. And John, when again, the project is Watergate's Secrets and Betrayals, available August the 8th, 50 years after the events of Watergate. And John, when you're doing this project and you're doing the narration, what really appealed to you about taking on that role of being the voice to kind of guide the audience through the journey?
That it is not up to me to come to a conclusion. That I am neutral in this, and we want to basically, the purpose of this exercise that George undertook with Geoff Shepard was really to lay out what the actual evidence was, so that the audience can determine for themselves, or at the very least be intrigued to say, this thing was not as cut and dry as it was given to me when I was a child back then, and less historically curious.
And when I, again, look at what y'all have put together here, and I encourage everybody to do research and dive into this documentary and understand Nixon, because, again, he's painted with a brush of he had this bad presidency and he was unpopular and he resigned in scandal, some of which is true, George, but Richard Nixon also did a lot of incredible things during his tenure in office, things I think some people would be surprised about, as John and I were speaking actually before we recorded, establishing the Environmental Protection Agency and things of that nature that came under the watchful eye of Richard Nixon. What do you hope this would help maybe shift people's viewpoint on his legacy?
You know, I think for anyone to shine through the muck and mire, I would wish that for anyone. Certainly his accomplishments are there in black and white for people to read. You know, Title IX, creating of OSHA, opening China, détente with Russia, saving Yom Kippur, saving Israel in the Yom Kippur War. I didn't approach it from that point of view. I really wanted to show that a different narrative was now afoot. That the story that we had been told was in some cases, and I don't want to use this word, I take caution, but in some cases it was fabricated. It was adjusted for a political outcome, a very biased political outcome. And so that's my take in it, that Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights were trampled on. We all have those. Every one of us is entitled to them. The right to exculpatory evidence. That's one of the big words John was talking about earlier. Exculpatory. EX. You know, that's for audience members who may not know, and I didn't know when I came into this. It's information that can help the defense, that can show something else other than the prosecutor is proffering, and it was hidden. It was hidden from defense counsel intentionally, and we've got it in the documents. And so that was my main torch that I was carrying.
And John, did this project make you now question events that were told throughout history, American or world, and really try to, as you say, put them in a different context than perhaps what we were told, you know, in school?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, it makes me go back and want to read, you know, it's what made me want to read the book 1776. Made me want to read John Adams, because that particular author, and you know who I'm talking about, has a wonderful way of digging out what was actually happening, and not swaying to one side or the other, but actually painting the impressionist picture of what life was like during those times, and similarly what was life like during that crazy period between 1972 and the resignation of 1974.
And my last question, George, and again, I really want everyone to go watch Watergate's Secrets and Betrayals, available August the 8th. Nixon steps down. Obviously, he continues to live out his years. There's the Frost Nixon interviews, and that's even been depicted in movies. And his legacy is in a lot of people's minds cemented. And I think this documentary is going to help at least open up more questions and maybe help people look in through a different prism. When President Ford, you being a fan of presidential history, when President Ford pardoned Nixon, people have gone back and said, well, that was the right thing to do, it was the wrong thing to do, it helped the country move on. No, it set a dangerous precedent that presidents can do whatever they want and get away with it from their buddy or their vice president. How do you view President Ford's decision all these years later, 50 years later, as you're looking at Watergate, to go ahead and give Nixon that pardon?
I think President Ford said it best himself. He said, let this long national nightmare come to an end. It's over. I think that sums it up nicely.
And I will add to what George said. It also very neatly tucked away the need for anyone to look any deeper.
Well, but now deeper has been looked through, and we are exploring all the information regarding Watergate's secrets and betrayals, available August the 8th. You can go to watergatesecrets.com for more details and information. John and George, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you so much for making this documentary. I think it's very important.
A lot of fun to be able to talk to you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.